AFC North schedule analysis. We're going to dive right into this topic. First, I'm going to throw it to you, Ron. We're going to go back to the NFL talking points in June and what we're looking at in addition to the schedule analysis.
Okay, Chris, this is our second one. We did the NFC East, so we're not going to be as thorough in terms of going over the talking points. So go back to that particular video if you want a more thorough explanation, and you can find that if you follow me on Twitter, it'll be up front. You can just click and find it. But with the talking points, we're at a good point right now in June. It's a little quieter now, but there are 4 points of analysis. More than that, if you go back to Pythagorean theorem and really assess where the rosters are right now. Before free agency, what do the teams look like? What were the player analysis? What's the coaching changes? And there were plenty of them. And when you go to free agency, you have to include the blockbuster trades that were made during the year, during the offseason, Russell Wilson, so on and so forth. Free agency frenzy, it was crazy. That's part of the puzzle. The next part of the puzzle is the draft itself. A lot of teams did well in the draft because it was a very deep draft. But for our purposes, Chris, we're really interested in what the impact is for this year. If we're going to talk about week-to-week schedule, if we're going to talk about season wins, conference totals, and so on, what rookies have a chance to contribute right now? And then finally, the schedule analysis report. I did a detailed schedule analysis report. It talks about peaks and valleys. We've all known who the teams are going to face. We just didn't know where in the schedule they were going to face them. Are they going to face them in Munich, Germany? Are they going to face a team off 3 weeks of road games? Are they going to face a short week and then a long week before they have a trap game against a team they haven't faced for 4 weeks, for 4 years or 8 weeks, and so on? So there's a lot of points that we have to look at very carefully before we determine where we want to go with season wins, conference futures, week-to-week analysis. Last slide here before we dig into the AFC North is, okay, what are we going to look at? We're going to look at season wins. We're going to look at divisional and playoff odds. And we're going to use the tool chest, all 4 things that we discussed, to arrive at a conclusion as to where we are right now with season wins. Do we want to pull the trigger now, or do we want to wait? So we're looking team by team, and we're looking for edges. Something that we see in the schedule that maybe somebody else won't see because we're doing a deeper dive, the rest differential, the quarterback situation, fatigue, even roster strength, because it's a long season. And then finally, Chris, you and I have discussed this, and we did this in the AFC East preview. There's value whether you go team by team and write some notes down. I'm constantly writing notes. This is a time period to get ahead of the curve. We don't want to overreact when the season is going on. We want to use the data that we've carefully looked at and put together now, and don't overreact week to week. We may have some expectations of where a team should be by week 5. Let's not overreact to just week 4 results to get at that conclusion. And then I have all my team sheets armed with pre and post data, filling in the data, filling in the power numbers. And that's the background behind what we're going to discuss right now when we talk about Baltimore and the rest of the division.
Yeah, and I want to remind people the schedule analysis is an absolute must read. Link to be able to download those will be at the end. Absolutely worth looking at a paragraph or 2 on each team to carefully be aware of what's going on there. And as you referenced, what we both do is we go through each week of the season. You're doing it by team, I'm doing it by week, and we're making notes ahead of time before the season starts to save time and effort during the regular season when we're most busy and running on fumes, so to speak. So important to kind of set ourselves up for success ahead of time, so that we, if there's surprises in the schedule and with team records and stuff, it may not be a surprise for us, especially when you see the teams intersecting each other, and there may be unexpected results that aren't quite so unexpected if you're looking ahead of time. Looking at Baltimore, Ron, what are your feelings on Baltimore this year?
Well, this is where the stars pretty much aligned. We talked about a few teams in the AFC East where we needed to wait and see. We needed all the pieces. We were at one point in the spectrum, I was high, I was low. Baltimore, I've been high all along. So if you look at the four factors, what was the roster like before free agency? It was a good roster. It was a roster. We know before the season started, they lost their top three running backs. We know Lamar Jackson didn't play the last 5 weeks of the season. And during that time, they had a 4-game stretch where they lost twice because of failed 2-point conversions last play of the game. I think they had an overtime game and another 1 or 2 point losses. They lost 4 games by a total of 5 points in the stretch, all without Lamar Jackson, all with some backups at critical positions. So going in, I was bullish. Then you look at free agency, and that was okay. There was nothing bad that happened, essentially. The draft was highly interesting. Baltimore usually kills the draft. This is a deep draft. They have 6 choices in the 4th round alone. Baltimore decided the hell with wide receivers. We're going back to what we do best. They traded their wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers in the league, an emerging wide receiver in Brown. They already had a really good tight end. Now they have 3 really good tight ends because they drafted 2 in the 4th round. They drafted an offensive lineman. They care about that area. Lamar Jackson is back. I know he has an unsigned contract, but he has every intention of playing this year. They're going to, their intentions are telegraphed. We're going to run the ball down your throat. And when that doesn't work, we're going to give Lamar Jackson tall targets to throw to, and it's going to work. And their roster is better than it was before. And you top that off with the schedule. They play a 4th place schedule. They're uncommon opponents, the teams that the other divisional rivals will not play. Denver, Jacksonville, the New York Giants. They're not overloaded with primetime games. They have double revenge against Cincinnati. They play in the same road stadium when they play the Giants and the Jets, which is a perk that I don't think other people really pay attention to, but they're in the visiting locker room the second time in a row. They know the stadium. To me, it is a perk. They have a significant schedule edge. When you add all that together, I found tremendous value, and I did not wait in terms of their divisional prospects, plus 240, plus 225. Still, I think we discussed it's in the plus 200, plus 220 range, but I have them as the favorite to win the division. What do you say?
You know what? You really didn't say very much there, so I'd like to expand upon that. But you took everything I had to say away from me.
I'm sorry.
I actually beat you to the gun, and I actually started playing Baltimore to win AFC and to win Super Bowl early on at very nice numbers. And then I obviously took the division plus 250, plus 220. And I just really like it. I don't like my AFC and Super Bowl futures as much just because the AFC is just so strong. But, I've got numbers north of 30 on the Super Bowl and mid-20s on the AFC. So there's still good numbers. But there's going to be a lot of competition for that. But I think the division was the way to attack this. I see Cincinnati. We're going to get to next. For the reasons we go through this division, I think it's going to be obvious that Baltimore has value at this point, and that's where I pulled the trigger. As you mentioned, the last place schedule, the injuries. You've got Jackson in a contract year. He's going to be motivated. They did a great job on the draft. Their schedule is not bad. There really aren't any bad stretches, and they control their own destiny when the season ends. More than likely against Cincinnati, I think they finished with it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, I'm with you. As far as season wins on the 10, I didn't put that up here. I should have. The season win total is 10 on this team. I would probably lean over, but I haven't pulled the trigger on it. I probably would have liked to have had that 9.5 when it was available.
Well, this brings up 2 points. Number one, we talk about timing. And there was no indication, and I don't think you can make any case that Baltimore was not going to be a bullish public play on team. When you have one of those and you like them in a positive way, you've got to pull the trigger early. So the timing was to do this early. There are still 9.5s there. The value of shopping, you have to have a number of outs. You can't do this. If you just played circa, a pretty sharp place, you wouldn't be getting the best of the line, whether you're going over or under, because they know their stuff, in my opinion. You have to have different lines so that you can gauge the market. If you're bullish on Baltimore like we are, and you like the 9.5, I would advise you to do it sooner, because the juice is going to go up. If not, you're going to see the 9.5s disappear. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I'd like to remind people the approximate value on a half game on these season win totals is somewhere around 45 cents. So factor that in accordingly if you're trying to decide on going over a 9.5 or going over a 10. And what's that melody you're listening to?
I don't know. I'm sorry about that. Got the new phone, and even though the volume is off, it seems like it needs to tell me that the phone is ringing. So
on to Cincinnati. I'm going to start here, so I have something to say.
Okay.
I think Cincinnati had, if you're looking at a horse race, it's called a perfect trip. And they, when we looked at Cincinnati going into last season, they were a great team, but they had no room for error with injuries and such. And they skated through the season basically unscathed, injury-wise. Are they going to be able to do that again? That's highly unlikely. They had a lot of luck in close games. I think that will not be the same. They filled their offensive line needs a little bit. They filled, I think, 3 spots, which is going to help them out. But they're going to face that first place schedule. They were coming off a last place schedule last year. They're going to see a lot more primetime games. They're going to see short weeks. They're going to have a tougher, non-common opponent schedule within the division. And that's just going to make things difficult. They exceeded their Pythag last year, and it seems similar to Cleveland the year before. Hey, this team looks really good. Let's back them. But hey, wait a minute. They exceeded their Pythag but we don't care. We're going to bet them anyway. And look what happened to the Browns last year. And I kind of sort of see that setting up for Cincinnati. I think they're a fine club. I think they've got a lot of tools. I just think that they're going to fit in that kind of difficulties are going to arise sort of situation throughout the year, and it's not going to be smooth sailing. How do you see it?
Well, we're pretty much going to be on the same page, because I've been pretty bearish on Cincinnati. It's easy to root for Joe Burrow. I mean, really easy, and the chemistry, and it's nice to see Cincinnati of what they are now as compared to the thugs they were on the field a few years ago, when it was penalty after penalty after penalty and all that other stuff. I like rooting for them, but my money doesn't like rooting for them for 2022. We started off and we knew they had offensive line deficiencies. That was obvious. They fixed that in free agency for the most part. They still have a little work to do. And chemistry-wise, just like Kansas City last year, it takes a little while for that to gel. So where I think they're going to be in September on the offensive line is not where I think they're going to be in November. So there will be some growing pains there. And the other thing is the secondary needed attention and got it in the draft. The problem is the brutal schedule, the Super Bowl letdown, if you will, where Super Bowl losers have a little bit of trouble. The fact that this isn't New England, where they're used to 5 primetime games every year. They basically have had 1 primetime game every year, and now they're going to have 5. And like you mentioned, the ebbs and flows. Another great point you mentioned was the injury situation. It's now 17 weeks, 6% more snaps, 6% more times that you're going to be hit. For Cincinnati, it was even more than that, because they played 20 or 21 games because of the playoffs. They had amazing injury luck, and that's very unlikely to happen in this brutal sport that we call the NFL. And they have just a gauntlet of opponents. We know one year doesn't necessarily translate to the next. So if I give you the stat that the last 8 opponents they play, last year were 83, 52, and 1, you're going to say, wow, that's gauntlet now. So it probably regresses a little, but it's still going to be a tough schedule. Any way you slice it, 83, 52, and 1 is not going to regress to 60 and 70 or something like that. Kansas City has double last play revenge against them. Like you mentioned, the uncommon opponents are going to be tougher. And 10 is mostly their season win total. You didn't have it up now. You're going to see a lot of 9.5s and a few 10s. And this is, again, I think it's split. I don't think necessarily that everybody's going to jump the way we're jumping and go under. But I'm not waiting. I pulled the trigger on 10 a few times, and it's just one of those cases where with one less home game, because the AFC has one less home game, we mentioned that last week. Do they really have 11 wins in them? And I'm saying no.
What do you think about the coaching? I think the coaching staff has taken some kind of hard knock, so to speak, as far as the court of public opinion. And it did seem like there were some questionable coaching decisions throughout the season last year, and they succeeded despite some coaching decisions. So what are your thoughts on that?
Chris, first of all, thank you so much for bringing that up. I didn't know you were going to bring that up, and it was a point that we need to make, because this time last year, everybody was saying Zach Taylor was one of the worst coaches in football. And then he brought the team to the Super Bowl, and now all is forgiven. But is all forgiven, or did they have, like you said, the perfect ride? If you stack Zach Taylor with the other coaches that have had at least 2 years of experience, he'd still be near the bottom. So how do we know he's going to give them a perfect trip with all the decisions he has to make during the game? No, you have to give him credit for having such a great year. But he's not Andy Reid. He's not Mike Tomlin. He's not some of these other guys. He's just got a good roster to work with, and now he's got a lot of things on his plate that he's never faced before. So the short answer to your question is, it's still wait and see. I still see some issues.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I just see a lot of converging issues that are going to come together and be distractions. There's the high expectations. There's the inevitable problems that they didn't have last year that are going to come up to play this year. It's hard to be overly optimistic. I see this team as a potential playoff team, but I just can't see them winning this division with that schedule. And that moves us on to, another enigma is what the hell's going on in Cleveland? The way I see it, I think that Watson will be out for the entire season. I fully expect him to not play. I think that they're a very strong team. They've got a lot of great parts there, and they don't have the same high expectations that they had last year that worked against them. So I think that this kind of is okay for them because everybody's focusing on the QB and they're focusing on Baker. I don't understand why they would let him go because he's a cheap quarterback. But from what I hear, there's no way he's coming back to Cleveland. There's a lot of people on Twitter that say there's zero chance he comes back. I don't understand why they would do that. They don't have he fits within the salary. I mean, he's got the talent. He's going to be better than the backup. What are your thoughts with this team?
Well, it's a two-way street, and Baker Mayfield was pretty much what was he shamed? Whatever he was, whatever the comments came up, he doesn't want to come back now. But strange as it may sound, if I knew he was the quarterback day one and Watson was out for the year, I think Cleveland with lowered expectations would be second in the division to me, certainly ahead of Cincinnati.
Right.
If you look at their roster, other than quarterback, where's the weakness? I'm not saying it's top five in every single area, and you could say they're rebuilding along wide receiver, but their running backs are top notch. Their offensive line is a little better than average. Clowney re-signed, and the defense is really stout up front, and they have multiple bodies, I think 6 or 7 defensive backs who could start on various teams. The coaching is stabilized. The kicking is decent. The issue is quarterback, or at least knowing who the quarterback is and how many reps they get. If you look all the way through the talking points that we started with, roster before free agency, the draft, the scheduling impact, and so on, I don't have a clue as to where to go with them. How's that for honesty? They have a nice, manageable, no Sunday night, no Monday night schedule, because even the schedule makers had no idea who was going to be quarterback and who wasn't. So I can't tell you where to go as a team. And again, we focused on season wins, but we should also use this time to talk a little bit about how to attack the season. For example, we missed it, but Cincinnati, I would attack them as being play against in September. With Cleveland, I think we're going to see a lot of close games because the roster is good enough to have every game tight. So the way I would approach them, let's see what you think, Chris, is that I might just be looking, who's the underdog? Am I getting 3 points or more? And I expect a good game every time they take the field.
Well, if you're looking at week 1, there's been a mad rush of Carolina, because that was Cleveland was favored by 4.5. Okay. And with Watson looking like he's not going to be in, I just think this is an overreaction that I'm looking at it and I'm holding some Carolina +4, and I know the line is probably going to go south of 3, and I was going to buy some more, and I thought to myself, well, why? I don't understand what's wrong with this Cleveland. I don't care who they have. I think is Brissett the backup that's going to start if Mayfield isn't there?
He's probably a backup. He has starting experience a few years back at Indy when Andrew Luck missed time.
Right.
He's kind of like Tyrod Taylor. Remember Tyrod Taylor?
Yeah.
He was an apprentice for a long time. And then he was a game manager in a way, but he didn't hurt the team with turnovers. And that's all Cleveland's going to ask of a quarterback not named Watson is don't blow the game.
Yeah, don't make mistakes. Be an Eric Kramer type that for the Lions that got him through a great season, one of the few ones. I just look at that week 1 line, and I'm like, I don't want Carolina +3. I don't have high optimism for Carolina this year. I think they're going to be a down team, and I think, as you mentioned, Ron, this Cleveland team is stacked, and I think the perspectives on this team are kind of skewed, and it's going to be interesting to see how the market reacts to Watson being suspended, because I just feel like it's already factored in for the most part, and I think that there might be some market manipulation involved to kind of drag this line down and try to open up that 3 for the scalpers and middlers, so to speak. Because I don't want to load up on Carolina +3. I just don't.
So basically for Cleveland, it's a wait and see.
Yeah.
Let's see how it happens. But we're not necessarily bearish on them. We're okay with them. And let's see where it goes. Again, it's an interrelationship of them versus all the other teams on their schedule versus all the teams in their division. And so far, we're high on one team, low on another. Then we've got Pittsburgh to deal with. And Cleveland's kind of in the middle.
Speaking of Pittsburgh, I've gone up and down with this team. It did seem that Pittsburgh was going to be down this year. Ben gone. Who's going to quarterback? There's some other attrition going on. And then all of a sudden, they made moves. We know Tomlin is one of the best coaches in the league. He commands the respect and discipline from whoever he has. And they started adding parts. They started adding free agents. They did okay in the draft. And I'm one of the few guys. I don't poo-poo Trubisky. I believe Trubisky was put in situations that were set up for failure, and he does have some past history of some success before those situations. And I think he can be fine, because the major difference here is you had a statue at quarterback all last year. He couldn't throw downfield. He couldn't run the ball. You've got somebody that can throw downfield a little bit. You've got somebody that can add that added aspect of being able to run. You added running backs. You added receivers. I would wanted to be optimistic on Pittsburgh this year. And then you take a look at this schedule, and I'm going to let you dissect the schedule. This schedule is rough. If it's not the worst, it's the second worst in the league. Go ahead and take it from here.
Okay. This is a good counterpoint team, because we're not always going to agree on things on this. And that's good. That's healthy for the show. It's good when we agree, because we do a lot of work and we're successful at this. But it's also good to disagree, because no one goes 32 out of 32 with all the teams. I'm not high on Trubisky, but the only thing I will say about him is that he fits better in the year 2022 than he would have in 2012, when you have to have mobility at quarterback. And Mike Tomlin said as much, said, we couldn't run the full offense because Ben doesn't run. We know that. And these, it's almost like a dying art to have a quarterback who sits in the pocket these days, even though we still see many that are highly successful. Trubisky has to be able to run to be successful, because if he stays in the pocket, he's going to make too many bad decisions, in my opinion, and he will bring Pittsburgh down. Pittsburgh's evolving. The negative I have on their roster is that this is an offensive line that didn't do Ben any favors last year. They had 4 new pieces last year, and it showed big time. And they didn't draft. They always draft with a purpose, with focus. I like that. But they never draft the highest rated players at the positions. They let Creed Humphrey go to Kansas City late in the second round, and they picked up a center who was a revolving door in terms of pass rushers going right by him. So this is a team that needs 2 to 3 years to grow their roster, and that's a problem for me. You did mention the schedule. It's brutal, absolutely brutal. I could give you one good piece of news for Pittsburgh. They never leave the Eastern time zone, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
I mean, they play every single game without an hour of time difference. So they don't travel. I mean, they travel the fewest miles of any team. So
all the games are at 1 o'clock, right?
Pretty much. They still have some night games because they're Pittsburgh. Yeah, they'll still have that. But fatigue is not going to be a factor for the team. I mean, they're not going to get on an airplane and lose a whole day of whatever. They could bust to some of these places. So it's really the roster that scares me a little bit, and the evolution from one scheme to another. And the previous coach to Mike Tomlin, he's escaping my memory. How's your memory, Banks? But, a longtime coach, Bill Cowher. He was so innovative with the way he used the halfback option, and the way he used the quick slant to the running back or the wide receiver, the end around. And Mike Tomlin needs to get back to that, because he has a team built for a little more speed and to do that. But without any evidence of doing that, I think there'll be growing pains in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, but how's your outlook on the defense? They seem to still have a fair amount of tools to work with on defense. What are your thoughts?
You're right about that. As long as they keep Watt healthy, they're going to be a pain for opposing quarterbacks to get around. And the defense isn't going anywhere. The run defense really slumped last year, which was a surprise. They pride themselves on run defense, and it didn't do the job. And then about 2 weeks ago, their defensive tackle retired. So we've got a little bit of a problem. The pass drives the NFL. We know that. But if you want to get off the field in the fourth quarter, you better at least have somebody up the middle that you respect. And that's not going to happen in Pittsburgh. So there's a little worry there. They're well coached defensively, and they're going to be in the top 10 defensively. And as long as Trubisky or Pickett, if he ends up playing, keeps turnovers down, they're going to be like Cleveland. They're going to be in every game. The question is Trubisky the right quarterback to mount? You're 4 points down with 2 minutes to go. Does Trubisky win the game for you? Yes or no?
We'll see. And if I'm not mistaken, Tomlin's facing a challenge here, because I don't believe he's ever coached a sub 500 team, has he?
Never has, and
Right.
smoke and mirrors a lot, and he knows what he can do, and people want to come there to play for him. Miles Jack is there. They don't pursue free agency very much, but like you mentioned, they did a little bit more than usual this year because they recognize the roster has to be built up just a little. Season
Yeah.
win rise, no idea.
Last year they just seemed to do far better than expectations, and I think there's just a history with that organization with the current staff. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not predicting that they win the division or anything, or even go to the playoffs, but it was looking like this team was going to be a 4 or 5 win team. Shortly after the season ended, things were falling apart. And the only thing that I'm saying is, you can't disrespect this team entirely. They're gonna cause some problems for other teams throughout the season, and that's my standpoint on it. I wouldn't be looking to go over on this season win totals just based on their schedule. I can't play them for the division. I just think they're going to play spoiler, and that's where I'll leave it with that team.
Yeah, see, what I think you're saying is that you're willing to back them on a week-to-week basis with the right line, but they may lose some of the close games because they don't quite have the offense yet that you think, oh yeah, they can score at any time if they need to in crunch time. And it's an offensive-minded league. So I'm comfortable with Tomlin. I'm comfortable with him knowing his team and getting the most out of his team. But like we've alluded to, and we're going to talk more about when we get to other divisions, the AFC is rough.
It is.
It's really rough, and that's out of Pittsburgh's control. And their schedule is out of Pittsburgh's control, and it's rough. So those are my final thoughts.
Well, I agree. As we mentioned in previous videos, it's one of the deep. A lot of people didn't like the top end of the draft, but it was a very deep draft, and all the undrafted free agents. Actually, there were a lot of those that would have normally been drafted in another year. So, with that, we'll leave it with that. In the AFC North, we have make sure you download this NFC and AFC free schedule analysis that Ron has created at the link provided at the bottom that's scrolling. It's definitely something very useful. And we're going to have more topics coming up. We're going to go through all the divisions, and we'll be back when we can get the time to put these things together. If anybody ever knew what it took to get these things together, and this is just for fun. So,
yeah. Thank you.
Great chat, Ron. We'll be back soon.